Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for letting us into your space today. We want to let you know that over this holiday season, we have a lot of events happening, a lot of groups that are starting up in the new year. So be sure to head on over to our website at cccgreeley.org. Check out everything that is going on. Also, if you're watching us today, be sure to like and subscribe. That way you know when more content comes into your feed. Same with if you're listening on the podcast. Please like and subscribe. And if you like what you hear, you enjoy our message, and you want to partner with us financially, we encourage you to look down below. There's a button for giving for year-end gifts. If you feel led and moved to do so, we would really appreciate your gift, and we hope you enjoy today's message.
My name is Nate. I'm one of the pastors here. I get the privilege of really working in a lot of our outreach efforts, so stuff we do locally, globally, down at Zoe's. But part of my role is actually getting to be here on the teaching team. And so thank you for having me tonight. I do want to give a special welcome to everyone who is watching online. So you guys may not know this, but we have our friends down in Traditions on Sunday mornings, our friends in LaSalle, our friends at Broadview, and then everyone who watches on YouTube. So I just want to say we love you. We are so grateful that you're here with us and that we all get to be on this journey together. So as a church, for the last couple weeks, we have been on this journey where we're taking time here in our services to focus on the 4 key themes of Advent. And not only that, we've also had these devotionals we've been doing with the Bible Project, some podcasts that we've produced, books to explore with our kids. It has been great. I hope you guys have been taking advantage of it. For me, this season has actually been incredibly life-giving, especially this year. You see, for a lot of us, and I'm definitely guilty of this, when we approach Advent or things like Advent with Christmas, it's really just too easy to kind of get into the routine, right? It's like, oh, I know the motions, I know what we're doing. But this year's been a little different. And it's not just because of the things that I'm learning, it's also because of what I'm experiencing. You see, Advent has been inviting me this year to do some things that go against my normal rhythm of living. And what I've been finding is that I need that. You see, most of the time I spend my life racing through one thing so that I can get on to the next. Whether it's what I do here at the church, stuff I do with my family, or even my hobbies, everything is about climbing that next hill. It's all about accomplishing that next goal. And this way of living, I'll be honest, it's very rewarding. It is. I love the work that I do. I love seeing the way that God moves through it. But if I'm being really honest, it's also exhausting. And more often than not, it causes me to miss out on some of the beautiful things that are happening right in front of me. And some of those things, especially in this Advent season, they're really important. And that's why I'm so grateful for Advent, because it forces me to slow down. And it invites me to ask, what does this all even mean? Right? What's at the heart of this Christmas season? And most importantly, how should it actually impact the way that I live? You see, I'm being reminded that the purpose of Advent isn't just to rush me to December 25th. It's not to get us into the holiday spirit. It is to slow us down enough so that we can prepare our hearts for the arrival of Jesus. And as we do this, we're invited to step into the promises of hope, peace, joy, and love, and to allow these promises to actually change us. These past 3 weeks, we have covered the first 3 themes of Advent. And today we're going to be focusing on the last one. We are going to be talking about love and how it arrives in Jesus. Now, love seems to be everywhere this time of the year, doesn't it? It's kind of like every Hallmark movie basically centers around the same plot. You got 2 star-crossed lovers who somehow got separated years earlier, but find their way back to one another in those small towns that they grew up in. It's predictable. But it works. It works. That's why they keep making them. And it's not just the movies, it's also the music. I mean, think about some of the songs that all the stores play on repeat this time of year. All I Want for Christmas Is You. Can we be honest? Mariah Carey, she is like the queen of Christmas. I'll Be Home for Christmas. All right, these are songs about love. It's everywhere. And honestly, I think that's a part of the beauty of this season we're in, because these things, they remind us of how amazing love can be when we experience it. Now, can we all collectively be honest for a moment? I think we'd all agree that love is beautiful when we see it portrayed in media. But when it comes to our experience of it, well, it's not always that simple, is it? I remember sitting with a friend a few years ago during Christmas at a coffee shop, and the place was packed. I mean, the lights on the tree were twinkling. You had Michael Bublé playing in the background. Everything about this moment was festive. But my friend, he wasn't smiling. He just sat there and stared down at his coffee. Now, I knew something was wrong, so I asked him about it, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Nate, I just don't feel it this year." He then went on to tell me how this season had become a reminder in his life of all the things that he was missing, of everything that had gone wrong, the broken relationships, the unmet expectations, the frustration of having to show up to yet another family gathering with a fake smile on his face, pretending that everything is okay. And all the while, he was just feeling empty inside. You see, what my friend was longing for was something more real than what he was experiencing. He wanted love. And not just that momentary feeling we get sometimes, he wanted the real thing. That conversation has stayed with me because I think what he said is something that so many of us can resonate with deep down, because we all long for love. And it's not the polished Hallmark kind of love, not the version that looks good in a photo or makes a nice card that you send out to your friends. We want the real thing. We want a love that is dependable, a love that is steady, a love that's close, a love that doesn't give up on us. But here's the thing that I've noticed in my life. Even the best human love, as good as it is, as life-giving as it can be, it's never quite enough, is it? You see, it can't touch that deeper ache that we all feel inside. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that God has set eternity in the human heart, which means that there is this part of us that is wired for something more, for something this world or the people in it could never actually truly satisfy. And maybe that's why for so many of us, when it comes to our experiences with love, we end up just feeling a little bit empty. Because for us, love doesn't always live up to the hype of those movies and those songs. It doesn't always meet our expectations. Sometimes love feels conditional, or maybe it's just here one minute and then gone the next. Other times love feels manipulative or fragile. And look, when that's been your story, when love keeps letting you down, you start to wonder, does the kind of love that I long for even exist? And if it does, will I ever get to experience it? This is where Advent speaks directly into our lives, because it reminds us that the longing we feel, that ache for a love that is more real than anything we've ever experienced, it tells us that this love exists. And not only that, it tells us that that love, it's for us. That's the heart of the Christmas story. It's the story of a God who saw our need and didn't just sit back and wait for us to figure it out. He acted, he did something about it. John 1:14 puts it this way. It says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." In other words, God didn't stay where he was because he loved us. He stepped into the brokenness of our world so that his love could meet us right where we are. But here's the thing about his love. It doesn't always show up the way we think it should. And it doesn't always look the way that we think it should. And I think, honestly, that's where a lot of us get stuck, because the reality is life can be hard sometimes, right? We go through these things that don't make sense, these moments where we're holding on to hope in one hand, but in the other hand, there's the harsh reality of what we're experiencing. And these two things, right, our expectation and then reality, we can't make sense of them when they don't agree with one another. Which means that often we just end up feeling alone, rejected, and unloved. And in these moments, it's difficult to believe that God's love is here, that it's for us. But what I found in my life, and what I'm still finding even today, is that it is in these moments that I need to lean into God's love the most. Because his love, it's not just an idea. It's not just a nice thought that we throw around here in the church to make us feel better. His love is real. It is here. And it is for us. And I'm convinced that if we can learn to trust this, if we can learn to lean into this reality, it will change everything for us. And that's exactly what we're going to see in the story that we're going to be exploring in our time together today. We're going to be looking at the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus in John 11. Now, if you know this story, I probably know what you're thinking. This isn't your typical Christmas story. And I get it, right? There's no manger, there's no shepherds or angels or wise men, no proclamation of a coming king. But even so, what we see unfolding here gets right to the heart of Advent, because this story is about the love of Jesus stepping into the very real and the very human moments of the lives of some people that he really loved. Now, something to know about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. They weren't strangers to Jesus. These three who were siblings, they were actually his friends, and they weren't just like casual friends. You know those people on Facebook that you added 10 years ago, but you never actually talked to them? It wasn't like that. Jesus was actually close to them. They were the kind of friends that you do life with. They had this deep trust in who Jesus was and this love that he had for them. And I think that's what makes this story so relatable. Because as we watch them go through something that was incredibly hard, we're going to see them wrestling with feeling like Jesus wasn't there for them. And I think that's something we can relate to, because it's the same emotional place that we often end up in our lives when life is challenging. It's a place that feels hopeless, and it's a hard place to be. But here's the good news of what we see in John 11. Jesus doesn't leave them in that hopeless place. We're going to see Jesus meet them right in the middle of their trial, right when they felt abandoned. And his love in that moment is going to change everything. As we look at their story, we're going to explore how the same thing that's true for them is also true for us. In this story, we're going to see three ways that God's love arrives through Jesus, three ways that speak directly into the places that we find ourselves in today. And so the first is this. Love arrives by showing up. Now, at the beginning of this story, we find Mary and Martha in the middle of a crisis. Their brother Lazarus was on his deathbed, and they knew he needed help. And not just any kind of help, right? This wasn't the kind of help that, you just hop in the car and go drive to the drugstore. They needed Jesus. And so they sent him a message saying this: Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, have you ever gotten a message like that? Where a friend tells you that they're sick, or that a loved one is about to pass, or that there's some other crisis? Now, in those moments, our immediate impulse isn't to ask questions. We don't ask them to give us more details. What we do is we drop everything we're doing so we can go be with them. That's what Mary and Martha are counting on Jesus to do when he hears that their brother is sick. You see, they know he loves their brother, and they believe that love was going to compel him to act, that it was going to compel him to do something to help. But what we see is that Jesus didn't respond the way that they hoped he would. Verse 6 actually tells us that when Jesus heard the news, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Now, this response doesn't make a lot of sense to me at first glance, because if Jesus loved Lazarus, why would he wait? Why would he stay where he was 2 more days? Why wouldn't he help? That's probably what Mary and Martha were wondering. For them, these 2 days must have felt like an eternity. And in that time of Jesus waiting, their fears came true. Lazarus got sicker and he ended up passing away. For Mary and Martha, this wasn't just like a moment of confusion where they were trying to figure out what happened. For them, this probably felt like betrayal, like a prayer that wasn't answered. Have you ever experienced something like that in your life? Maybe there was a time where you were waiting on God and you were just hoping and praying. The situation was dire. But no matter how much you cried out, all you heard back from God was silence. And those moments, they are so difficult to walk through. And if we're honest with what we feel in those moments, most of us probably feel like God isn't hearing us. We're probably wondering if God even cares about us. But here's what Advent reminds us of, and we're going to see it here in this story. God's silence is never his absence. right? God's silence is never his absence. And we know this because when Jesus spoke to his disciples about Lazarus in verse 4, and keep in mind, like this is right after Jesus had got that note saying he was sick. This is what he told his disciples. He said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it." You see, from the very beginning, Jesus knew what no one else in this story knew. He knew that Lazarus' story was not going to end in tragedy. Why? Because he knew that his love was going to show up for him. This is one of the beautiful truths that Advent reminds us of. It's why we have dedicated a whole week to reflecting on this love, this idea that God's love shows up. Look, we see it in the Christmas story. Right before the birth of Jesus, the people of Israel, they'd been clinging to the hope of a Messiah for hundreds of years. And for hundreds of years, they had been longing for him and his love to arrive. But for so long, it seemed like God was just silent. It felt like God had forgotten them. But then one night in Bethlehem, a night that nobody was anticipating, God's love showed up. Friends, it might not arrive on our timeline. It might not arrive in the ways that we expect it to, but God's love always shows up. And when it does, it changes everything. We see it in this story. After waiting for 2 days, Jesus finally got to where they were. But by the time he got there, Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now that detail, right, about the 4 days, it seems minor, right? Most of us, we just kind of gloss right over it, but it's not random. It's actually pretty significant. You see, in the Jewish tradition, it was believed that the soul would linger near the body after somebody passed away for 3 days. But by the fourth, the soul would depart, which meant that by the fourth day, any hope for a miracle was gone. Think about what this meant for Mary and Martha, right? Jesus, this one that they loved, this one that they trusted in, he wasn't just late. He was too late. And there was nothing he could do anymore to help them. But this is when we have to remember what Jesus said to his disciples, right? He told them this sickness, it's not going to end in death. He told them that what was happening here was for God's glory. His arrival, it's not random. It was intentional because it was a part of something much bigger that was happening behind the scenes. Church, this is the tension that we're invited to sit with during Advent. It's the tension of longing for something we haven't fully experienced yet, and all the while holding on to the hope and the promise that despite what we see, despite what we feel, God's love will show up. As we continue in the story, we're going to see another thing about the way God's love arrives through Jesus. Because when his love shows up, it doesn't just observe what's happening as an outsider, it gets involved and it steps into the mess we're dealing with. This is the second way we see God's love arrive through Jesus. It arrives by stepping in. When Jesus got to Bethany, he arrived on a scene that was fairly chaotic, right? For Mary and Martha, the loss of their brother, it was overwhelming. It felt final. That there was no hope. They were absolutely broken. But here's what I love about what Jesus does here. You see, he doesn't avoid the messiness of this moment. He doesn't wait for things to calm down. He's not looking for an opportune moment to step in and get involved. When he gets there, he just steps right into the middle of it. The first sister to go and talk with Jesus was Martha. When she heard that he was there, she went out to find him on the road before he even had time to get to their house. And when she found him, the first words out of her mouth were this: "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, do you feel the tension that's in these words? Right? On the one hand, they reflect this deep belief in Jesus' power. It's like she knew if Jesus had been here, he could have done something that helped her brother. Right? But on the other hand, it's like there's this unspoken question that is filled with both frustration and hurt. And it's the same question we ask in our moments of grief. Jesus, why weren't you here? Jesus, why didn't you stop this? Why didn't you help? She then goes on to say, but I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And I love that because her words here, they carry a flicker of hope, right? Yeah, she is in pain because of what she's lost, right? That's obvious, that's normal, but even so, she knows who Jesus is. And there's this trust that's there, and so she just chooses to cling to that. And Jesus, in response, he makes her a promise, saying, your brother will rise again. Now, when Martha hears this, she thinks that Jesus is talking about the future, right? That he's talking about the resurrection of the dead that was going to happen at the end of time. And so she says that in verse 24. But what we come to find out is that Jesus wasn't talking about this future. In this moment, he was talking about the present. You see, Jesus wanted to redefine her understanding of who he actually was. And so he responds and says this in verses 25 to 26. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Here, Jesus isn't pointing Martha to some distant future that can give her hope. He's not pointing to a future promise to give her comfort without addressing the reality of what she's experiencing. He's telling her that he can give her hope even there in the middle of her pain. And the hope Jesus gives, it's not just a theological hope, it's a practical hope. It's like he's saying that resurrection isn't just a belief. It's not just this thing that we have to get our thinking right on. What Jesus is saying is that resurrection is something to be experienced, that life is something to be experienced. And life and resurrection, they are found in a person, and that person, he is standing right in front of her. Martha responds to Jesus saying, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Right? She clings to who Jesus says he is. She chooses to trust him even when she doesn't understand what's happening, even when her world feels like it's crumbling all around her. Now, Martha isn't the only one grieving Lazarus' death. After her conversation with Jesus, she goes to find her sister Mary and tells her that Jesus is asking for her. And when Mary comes to him, her initial response to him is different than her sister's. You see, when Martha got there, she engaged Jesus in a conversation. They talked theology, but Mary, she doesn't have it in her to do that. She just falls at his feet. Right? She is so overwhelmed with her grief. When she finally gets the energy to speak, she says the same thing that her sister did, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now we're about to see something really profound about the way Jesus loves us when he steps into these moments of pain and sorrow in our lives. In verse 33, it says that when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. You see, here we see Jesus meeting Mary in her pain. There's no words, because what do you even say in a moment like that? But what Jesus does offer is this. He offers his presence. That phrase, deeply moved in spirit, that John uses here to describe how Jesus felt, it also has another meaning in the Greek. It also means angry. Right? So think about that in the context of this story. When Jesus sees her weeping, he's angry. Now, that doesn't mean that he's angry at Mary for not having enough faith. It doesn't mean he's angry at Mary for not, grieving properly or grieving too much for the loss of her brother. No, not at all. Scholars actually think that in using this word, the author is telling us that Jesus is angry at death. That he's angry at the brokenness and pain that sin has brought into the world, that he's angry that these people he loves so much are hurting so bad. He was troubled. He was feeling the weight of what was happening. In this moment, we see Jesus meeting Mary in her pain and stepping into it with her. And then comes the shortest verse in the Bible, verse 35. It tells us that after stepping into Mary's pain, Jesus wept. Think about that for a moment. The Son of God, the one who holds all power and authority in his hands, he stood there with his friends and he wept. This shows us how the love of Jesus is present with us in these painful things that we walk through. I mean, just think about it, right? He knew what he was about to do. He knew that resurrection was coming, but that knowledge of what was about to happen, it didn't stop him from fully stepping into that moment that was in front of him. You see, his tears here, they weren't a sign of weakness, they were a sign of love. A reminder that Jesus truly is Emmanuel, that he is God with us. This is one of the things that Advent reminds us of, that God is present with us and that his love doesn't avoid the hard places in our lives, that it doesn't rush us to move on or to look at the bright side. His love steps into our pain and he sits with us there in our questions, in our doubts, in our struggles. Maybe that's what you need to hear today. In the same way that Jesus wept with Mary and Martha, he weeps with you. Because his love, it steps in. But it doesn't stop there. You see, it's not just about presence. His love, when it shows up and steps in, it always calls us to something new. And this is the third way we see God's love arriving through Jesus in this story, and that's by calling out. After spending time with Mary and Martha, Jesus asked them to take him to the tomb where Lazarus was buried. He was finally ready to act, to do the thing he had intended to do from the very beginning, the very thing that would forever redefine what the arrival of love could accomplish. When they reached the tomb, the crowd who followed him there must have been wondering, what is he going to do? What could he possibly do? Right? Because they knew Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. This wasn't just a situation beyond hope. This situation was the very definition of hopeless. But Jesus, when he looked at the tomb, he didn't accept the finality of what they saw. You see, Jesus didn't see death. He saw opportunity. And so when he was there standing before it, he gave a command saying, "Take away the stone." Think about how this must have sounded to the crowd who was there. Think about how this must have sounded to these sisters who had just buried their brother. The stone wasn't just covering an entrance into the tomb, right? It wasn't just this barrier between the living and the dead. That stone was actually an emotional barrier. And rolling it away, it meant that they had to confront the reality of what was behind it. The undeniable evidence of sin, brokenness, and death. What Jesus was asking them to do, it was unthinkable. It was offensive. Now Martha, knowing this, said in verse 39, "But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." Right now, her words here, they're not irrational. They're actually pretty practical. I mean, his body had begun to decay. It was too late. Why bother? Now, before we judge Martha for not listening to Jesus, let's just have another moment of honesty. Her response here, isn't that usually the way we respond in similar situations? When Jesus asks us to take a step of faith when the outcome seems impossible, when he asks us to confront the things that we've buried or face the things that we think are dead, just like Martha, we said, "Lord, it's too late. There's no point in trying." The reality is, when we look at the tombs in our lives, we are prone to only see the barriers, to only see the reasons that it won't work. But Jesus, when he looks at these same things, he only sees the possibilities. And so he looks at Martha and he says this in verse 40, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" This wasn't just a reminder of their earlier conversation when Jesus asked her if she believed. This was an invitation. Jesus was inviting Martha to trust him in a way that she never had before, to believe that God's power could reach even into the most hopeless situation and do something miraculous. And so she does. She chooses to believe. She chooses to trust Jesus, and she allows them to roll the stone away. And so Jesus stands before the open tomb, and he lifts his eyes to heaven, and he prays, saying this, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. You see, Jesus wanted everyone there to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what they were about to witness was the work of the Father, that this was all for his glory, and that this would be something that would move them to believe that he is who he had said he is, that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, that he is the one who has been sent by the Father. And so after he prayed with a loud voice, Jesus then gave a command to the one laying in the tomb, saying, Lazarus, come out. There was no long speech, no elaborate ritual, just 3 simple words, Lazarus, come out. And then the miraculous happened. Lazarus, still wrapped in his burial clothes, he walked out of the tomb, no longer dead, but alive. In one moment, the love of God changed everything when it called Lazarus out of the tomb. I love the way that God's love manifested through Jesus in this story. I really do. Because he didn't just comfort Mary and Martha as they grieved the loss of their brother. His love wasn't passive, it was active. Jesus did something about their pain. He transformed it by reversing the very thing they feared. He turned death into life and despair into hope. He called Lazarus out of the grave, but he wasn't done there. You see, as Lazarus stood there, he was still wrapped in these clothes that had bound him in death. And so Jesus gave a second command to the crowds who were there, saying this, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Right? So even though Lazarus had been raised from the dead, he still wasn't fully free. Those grave clothes, they still clung to him. They were this reminder of the death that he had just walked out of. These clothes, which were once necessary, they were now holding him back. They were a symbol of everything he was leaving behind there in that tomb. They were a reminder of what he had been, but not what he now was. And so Jesus commanded them to be taken off so that he could step into this new life that he had been given, free from the things that bound him. Church, this is what God's love does when it calls us out of the tomb. It sets us free from the things that hold us back. And in doing that, it gives us a new identity. It gives us a new purpose. This story that we looked at here in John 11, it's about resurrection. It is, and it's beautiful, and it's amazing. But more than that, it's a story about love. Because love is the thing that compelled Jesus to show up when his friends needed him the most. Love is what compelled Jesus to step into the pain and the brokenness of this moment. And love is what compelled Jesus to call Lazarus out of the tomb and into something new. And look, this story, it's not just their story. It's our story. It's a story that we are invited to experience as well. And I know this because I'm watching it start to unfold in front of me in a very unexpected way. A couple months ago, I started meeting with a group of young guys, or 2 of them, over at Platte Valley Correctional Facility. If you don't know what that is, it's a youth detention center, basically like a jail. It's just a couple miles north of here. And I remember the first time that I walked into the facility, I was overwhelmed with the heaviness. I mean, there were locked doors everywhere. You got to push the little button to get buzzed in. There was this eerie silence in the waiting room, like the parking lot was empty. There was an undeniable sense of isolation. Everything about that place was a reminder to me of the brokenness that these kids are living with. In some ways, it's been hard to go there each week. I mean, the weight of it all, like it's heavy. But honestly, it's become the favorite part of my week. It really has. Because in the middle of all of this heaviness, I've started to see something incredible happen. Something unexpected, something beautiful. I've started to see God's love break through the darkness. About a month ago, when we were meeting, one of the guys looked at me and said he didn't think anyone loved him anymore because of what he had done. He told me how his family hadn't visited him in well over a year. And because of that, he just felt abandoned. He felt forgotten. In that moment, I didn't have any answers for him, right? I didn't have any solutions. All I could do was tell him what I know to be true. And that's that Jesus loves him. And that Jesus hasn't forgotten him. That Jesus sees him. And that even there in that prison, Jesus is with him. Man, I love that about Jesus. Like, he doesn't avoid our pain. He doesn't steer clear of our mess. He doesn't wait for us to get our act together. He just meets us right where we are with his love. And when he does, that's when things start to change. That's when he begins to do the things that only he can do. And I've been watching it play out right in front of me with these two guys. And look, I don't know how those stories are going to end. I really don't. But what I do know is this: Jesus is there. His love is there. And that's a pretty good place to start. So what do we do with this? How do we respond to a love like this? Well, let me ask you a few questions that might help you uncover what Jesus is inviting you to do today. The first question, it's simple, but it's not always easy. And that first question is this: where do you need Jesus to show up? Where do you need Jesus to show up? Is it a situation that feels overwhelming? Or a loss that you just can't seem to get past? Is there a diagnosis that has turned your world upside down? Sometimes the hardest part is just admitting we need help. But what if your first step were as simple as inviting Jesus into that space? What if it starts with a quiet prayer? Just saying, Jesus, I need you. I can't do this on my own. It might not feel like much, but trust me, it's enough. Because it's enough to open the door for him to show up. Here's another question to ask. Where do you need Jesus to step in? All right, where do you need Jesus to step in? Is there an area of your life that feels like it's out of control? Maybe it's your family, your finances, your mental health, or your relationships. Sometimes life feels so chaotic, and all we really want to know is that there is someone who is willing to help. If that's where you are, please hear this. Jesus is willing. He knows what you're going through, and he wants to help you. He wants to walk through that thing with you. So what if instead of trying harder to manage it all on your own, you just ask Jesus to carry it with you? And finally, one more question to sit with. Is there something Jesus is calling you out of? Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's shame, regret, the weight of your past, or a wound that just won't heal. We all have these things that keep us stuck, these things that hold us back. If that's where you are, please hear this. And this is really important that you hear this. Jesus isn't calling you out to expose you. This isn't about shame. He is calling you out so that he can set you free. So what would it look like to take a step towards freedom? Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you. Maybe it's confessing something that you've been hiding. Or maybe it's trusting him with a part of your life that you've never let go of. Just ask him, Jesus, what are you calling me out of? What are you calling me to? And then whatever he tells you, take that step. Church, I know these next few days are going to be full for many of us. I mean, there's so much happening, right? Meals to cook, presents to wrap, plans to finalize. It's the season of busyness where it feels like everything is just pulling our attention away. But my hope and my prayer is that in the midst of all of it, we take a moment to pause, to slow down, and to remember this incredible love, right? Because this love that arrived with Jesus, it's not distant. It's not waiting for you to get through your to-do list or to figure everything out. It's not demanding, it's not conditional. It is here. And it is present in the everyday, ordinary moments of our lives. The same love that arrived in a humble stable in Bethlehem is still arriving today. And here's the thing about this love. It's not something you have to strive for. It's not something you have to earn. It is a gift that invites us to receive it, to make room for it and allow it to transform us from the inside out. This love is patient, and this love is kind. It shows up when we least expect it, but most desperately need it. So as you go into this week, don't let the busyness of your life crowd out this truth. Don't miss the moments where God is gently reminding you that you are seen, that you are known, and you are loved. Let's pray. So before we do anything, we want to create some space here after the message for the Spirit to speak, to meet us right where we are and to lead us where we need to be led. And maybe it's a conversation he has with you about some of those questions about where we are and where we need him to step in and call us out. But let's just create space for him to speak to us. If you're comfortable with putting your hands out like this, I would just invite you to do that. This is a sign of submission. It is a sign of openness. And as you do this, just pray this simple prayer in your heart. Come, Holy Spirit. We wait. So come, Holy Spirit. We wait. I have this sense right now as I'm praying that there are some of us here and watching who, when we think about that last question of God, what are you calling me out of? Like there's just this fear we carry, this fear of being judged, this fear of being hated by the people who are around us. And I just feel like the Lord wants you to know that he is with you in that, and that his grace is sufficient for you. And he wants you to know that the freedom he is calling you into, this new life he is inviting you into, it is so much better than whatever it is you experience in the grave, in the tomb. And so if that's you, I just encourage you, trust Jesus. Take that next step. And Jesus, we're humbled by just the truth of your word and the ways that it reveals your love for us. Jesus, throughout history, you have been showing up. You have been stepping in and you have been calling us out. And Lord, we know that you are here in this space. You are here in this place. Holy Spirit, you are moving. And so all of those things that you did with Lazarus, would you do them with us here in this space as we prepare our hearts for what is yet to come? Open our hearts to you. Build our trust and our faith in you so that we could rest in your presence and embrace the hope, peace, love, and joy that you alone can bring. I pray this in your name, Jesus.
Coming out of this message, I just want to remind you, we are in this faith journey together. So please reach out. If you have any questions, any prayer requests, anything that you're processing, we would love to sit and chat with you. You can schedule a time to talk to a pastor. You can submit prayer requests. We are with you. We are for you. So thank you for this shared experience today, and have a blessed rest of your day.